My name is Nathan Reed, and for most of my adult life, I've worked as a search and rescue ranger in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. I thought I could handle anything: storms, avalanches, missing hikers, the kind of tragedies that come with the job. But the mountain has a way of taking things from you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but what it lets you keep. 3 months ago, during a winter rescue, 2 of my teammates froze to death less than 100 yards from the base camp. I found them the next morning, their faces pale and their eyes open, as if they had seen something out there in the dark that I hadn't. After that, I couldn't stay. The silence of the snow became unbearable. So I requested a transfer, somewhere far, somewhere quiet. They sent me to Alaska. The assignment was Camp Aurora, a small ranger outpost buried deep in Denali National Park. Population, 0. Accessible only by snowmobile during winter months. The kind of place they send people who need to disappear for a while. The trip from Anchorage took nearly 8 hours across frozen terrain. The deeper I went, the fewer signs of life I saw. The trees grew taller, darker. The sun hung low and bruised against the horizon, refusing to rise all the way. By the time I reached the camp, the sky had turned a deep violet, and the cold had teeth. The man waiting for me was Ranger Keller. His uniform was old, the green faded almost gray. His face looked carved out of the ice itself, sharp, hollow, worn thin by too many winters. He shook my hand, his grip trembling just slightly. "You're the new one," he said. "They told me you'd be here before dark." "I made good time," I said, but he didn't seem to hear me. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "The nights here are longer than they should be. Don't ever let them in." I didn't ask what he meant. Camp Aurora was smaller than I expected. 1 cabin, a generator shack, and a frozen water pump. Inside, the walls were lined with old maps and weather charts. A radio sat on the desk, an antique covered in scratches, its dials worn smooth. On the far wall, a large map of Denali was marked with red circles labeled dead zones. I asked Keller what they meant. He looked out the frost-covered window and said quietly, "Because the snow doesn't give them back." Before he left, he handed me a sealed, wrinkled envelope. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting barely legible. Across the front were the words, "Rules for surviving the long night at Camp Aurora." The envelope felt stiff with age, the paper inside crackling softly as I unfolded it. The writing was uneven, letters slanted and pressed too hard into the surface, as though whoever wrote it had been trembling. Some lines were scratched out, rewritten over and over, the ink smudged where fingers must have dragged across still wet words. Across the top, scrawled in blocky, nervous handwriting, were the words, "Rules for surviving the long night at Camp Aurora." Beneath it, 9 rules, short, simple, and wrong in all the ways that made my stomach tighten. After 10:46 p.m., lock every window. The wind carries voices. If the snow outside turns blue, do not look at it. If you hear tapping on the roof, count to 30. Do not move. Never go outside between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., not even for help. If the generator stops, wait exactly 7 minutes before restarting. When the northern lights appear, avoid the mirrors. If the radio says this is HQ, unplug it. HQ was shut down in 2004. If you see someone waving from the tree line, wave back only once. At dawn, if Keller knocks, do not open. He's not back yet. I stared at the paper for a long time. At first, I thought it was a joke, an initiation ritual, maybe something the old-timers left behind for new recruits. There's a certain kind of dark humor that comes with working in isolation. Long winters do strange things to people's minds. Still, something about these rules didn't feel like humor. The phrasing, the oddly specific times, the deliberate warning tone. Lock every window after 10:46 p.m. Not 10, not 11, 10:46. Too precise to be a joke. I let out a shaky laugh anyway, the sound small in the empty cabin. "Sure," I muttered. "The wind carries voices. And ghosts, I guess." The clock above the desk read 9:28 p.m. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the old window panes. The sound reminded me of whispers running through hollow pipes. I set the letter down on the desk, meaning to forget it, but my eyes kept going back to that first line. The wind carries voices. The cabin creaked as the temperature dropped. Somewhere in the rafters, ice cracked like bones shifting. The only real comfort in the room was the radio, an old analog model from decades ago, its casing scratched and its labels worn away. Keller had said nothing about it before leaving. I flipped the power switch. At first, all I heard was the familiar hiss of static. I adjusted the dial, scanning through dead frequencies. No signal, just the hum of the generator outside and the faint wind pressing against the windows. Then, buried under the static, I caught something. A sound, soft, rhythmic like breathing. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was feedback, a trick of the reception. But then a voice slipped through, faint and distant, cutting through the noise like a whisper in my ear. "Can you hear me, Nathan?" I turned toward the door instinctively, heart pounding. No one was there. The voice came again, a little clearer now. "Nathan, can you hear me?" I leaned toward the radio. My hand hovered over the dial, ready to shut it off, but the tone in the voice made me hesitate. It sounded almost familiar. "Keller," I asked. "That you?" Silence. Then, after a few seconds, a burst of static that almost sounded like laughter. I snapped the radio off. The cabin was silent again, except for the wind, which, for just a second, sounded less like air moving through trees and more like someone whispering my name. I folded the paper back into the envelope and shoved it into the desk drawer. I told myself I'd follow the rules, just in case. And yet, as I sat there alone in the cabin, I could have sworn the clock on the wall had stopped at 10:46 p.m. The first few hours of my shift passed in silence. I swept through the checklist, logged temperatures, refueled the generator, and made a perimeter scan. Everything seemed calm. The snow fell slow and steady outside, soft flakes that drifted lazily through the dim yellow light spilling from the cabin windows. For a while, I even managed to convince myself that all those rules in the envelope were just the product of long winters and lonely men losing their grip. At midnight, I was sitting at the desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The cabin creaked and settled as the wind brushed over the roof in long, sighing waves. My eyes were heavy, the kind of tired where every sound feels slightly delayed, like you're hearing the world from underwater. Then came the tapping. It was faint at first, a soft, almost polite rhythm on the roof. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, listening. The rules came rushing back to me. If you hear tapping on the roof, count to 30. Do not move. My breath misted in the cold air as I started counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3. Each tap felt closer than the last. I could hear the vibration through the old wood. 10, 11, 12. My hand instinctively moved toward the flashlight on the desk, but I stopped myself. Whoever wrote those rules might have been insane, but something in me didn't want to find out what happened if I didn't listen. 25, 26, 27. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt wrong. The kind that rings in your ears because there's too much nothing. I sat still for another full minute before finally exhaling. The wind outside picked up again, like the world had just started breathing. I tried to shake it off. Maybe ice had fallen off a tree. Maybe a loose branch hit the roof. Logic was easier than fear. By 2 a.m., the storm outside had thickened into a wall of white. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. I was just about to check the generator when the radio on the desk clicked on. No one had touched it. A burst of static cut through the air, followed by a woman's voice, calm, professional, the kind of voice you hear in emergency transmissions. "This is HQ. Storm incoming, Ranger Reed. Check the perimeter." I frowned. "HQ," I muttered. The frequency shouldn't have reached this far north. There wasn't even an operational HQ signal anymore, at least not one that registered on the logs. Still, the voice had used my name. I hesitated for a few seconds, then grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The cold hit like a wall. The wind had died down completely, but the air was thick with fog and flakes of snow that didn't seem to fall. They just hovered, glowing faintly in the dim light from the porch. The world was silent except for the crunch of my boots. I swept my flashlight across the clearing. The light reflected off the snow in dull white streaks, until it didn't. About 20 feet from the cabin, the snow had changed. It wasn't white anymore. It shimmered with a pale blue tint, like frost catching moonlight. I crouched, running my gloved fingers through it. It wasn't light reflecting. The snow itself was glowing faintly from beneath the surface. I stood up, my pulse quickening. The aurora borealis stretched faintly across the sky, streaks of green and blue rippling through the clouds. That must have been it, I told myself. The northern lights reflecting off the ice. Optical illusion, perfectly explainable. But the longer I stared, the stronger the color became. The soft blue turned deep, electric, like light bleeding through the surface of the world. And then the snow moved. At first I thought it was the wind, but there wasn't any. The glowing patch rippled, slow and deliberate, like something underneath was shifting. I stumbled backward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The glow pulsed once, faintly like a heartbeat. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran back to the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. Inside, the radio was still on. The same voice repeated over the static, quieter now, almost whispering. "Storm incoming, Ranger Reed. Check the perimeter." The message looped once more, and then, after a pause, it changed. "You shouldn't have gone outside." The radio clicked off. For a long time, I stood in the dark, staring at my reflection in the frosted window. Outside, the snow still glowed faint blue under the aurora, and beneath that, something was still moving. By 2:50 a.m., the cabin felt smaller than it had the night before, the air thicker, heavier, as if the darkness itself had weight. The storm outside had slowed to a steady whisper, a kind of soft static against the windows. I sat at the desk with the envelope of rules open beside me, reading the 8th line again and again. "If you see someone waving from the treeline, wave back only once." It was absurd. Who would be out here in the middle of the night, in this cold? And why the hell would waving twice matter? Still, after the radio incident, the glowing snow, and the tapping on the roof, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was waiting, watching for me to forget one of those damn rules. At 2:57 a.m., I noticed movement through the frost-covered window. At first, I thought it was just the snow catching the light. But when I leaned closer, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, a dark silhouette framed by the weak blue glow still pulsing under the snow. It was a man. He stood still, facing the cabin, not moving, not shivering, just watching. Then, slowly, he lifted one arm and waved. I froze. The gesture was small, mechanical, precise. It didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like an invitation. The rules echoed in my mind. Wave back only once. I hesitated. My body moved before my brain could stop it. Through the window, I raised my hand and gave a single, stiff wave. For a moment, nothing happened. The figure lowered his arm, almost politely. I felt my shoulders relax, a small exhale of relief leaving my chest. Then he raised his arm again and waved once more. I frowned. Maybe he didn't see me the first time. Maybe he thought I hadn't responded. Against every part of my better judgment, I waved again. The second I did, the world seemed to stop breathing. The wind outside died. The hum of the generator cut out. Even the steady creak of the cabin timbers went silent. Then from the tree line, dozens of arms rose into the air. Figures stepped out from the shadows, 10, 20, maybe more, all moving in perfect unison. Each of them lifted a hand and waved. The same exact motion, synchronized and slow, like puppets on invisible strings. The beam from the porch light flickered, illuminating their faces, or what was left of them. They were pale, almost translucent, the skin stretched tight over skulls that were too smooth. Where I should have been were hollows, black and endless. I stumbled back from the window, knocking over the chair. The sound of my breath filled the cabin, sharp and ragged. Outside, the figures began to move closer. Their steps didn't crunch the snow, they just glided, the way mist moves when the wind carries it. I grabbed my flashlight, the rules falling to the floor as I backed toward the door. The light flickered as I pointed it at the window. The glass frosted instantly, sealing over in a thin sheet of ice that crept across the frame. The temperature dropped so fast my breath turned to vapor. The radio clicked on. Static. Then a voice. Keller's voice. "You shouldn't have waved twice." The light bulb above me shattered, plunging the room into darkness. The only illumination came from the blue glow outside, now seeping through the cracks in the walls and under the door. I heard movement, slow, deliberate, the soft creak of the porch boards. Something brushed against the door, a hand maybe, dragging across the wood with a wet, squealing sound. I stumbled backward toward the bedroom, slammed the door, and pressed my back to it. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the sound of scraping, fingertips across glass, moved to the window beside me. I turned, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. 5 pale fingers pressed against the frosted glass from the outside. They stayed there, motionless, as if waiting. Then another set appeared beside them. Then another, until the entire window was covered in pale hands, layered over each other like frost patterns spreading across the pane. I screamed, more out of shock than fear, and bolted toward the closet. I crawled inside, slamming the door shut, clutching the flashlight to my chest. From the other side of the door came the faintest sound, a single, rhythmic knock. Then another. Then, whispering, too faint to be real. "Nathan, open up." My light flickered. I aimed it toward the crack beneath the closet door. For a split second, I saw bare feet, dozens of them, standing in the water pooling across the floor, all facing the same direction. "Mine." The radio hissed again, clearer this time, Keller's voice almost gentle. "They like the ones who wave back twice." The sound cut out. The knocking stopped. When I finally forced myself to open the closet door, the cabin was empty. The windows were bare again, the ice gone. But on the outside of the door, pressed into the wood like a brand, were 2 handprints side by side, melting slowly into the grain. When morning finally came, the sky was the color of steel. The storm had died, but the silence outside was worse than the wind. I hadn't slept. I just sat at the desk staring at the frost creeping along the window, waiting for the first hint of light. The rules lay beside me, the ink still wet from where the water had bled across the page. I needed to know what this place really was. I started digging through the filing cabinets in the storage room. Most of the folders were ruined, molded, water-damaged, or frozen stiff. But one caught my attention. The tab read, "Camp Aurora Collapse, 2004. The paper was brittle, but the words were still clear enough to read. Incident report. During the winter of 2004, Camp Aurora experienced a communications failure during a blizzard classified as Category 5. 5 rangers stationed at the outpost, led by Ranger Commander William Keller, were declared missing after the storm. Final transmission recorded at 3:02 a.m., believed to be a distress call to Regional HQ. Search and recovery operations suspended indefinitely. There was a photograph attached, 5 men in old ranger uniforms standing in front of the cabin I now occupied. One of them was Keller, younger but unmistakable. Behind them, faintly visible in the sky, were streaks of aurora light cutting through the clouds. I flipped the report over. Someone had written a note on the back in red ink, barely legible under the stains of time. "Do not answer the signal. It's not from HQ." My chest went cold. At the bottom of the drawer beneath the reports, I found an old cassette tape sealed in a cracked plastic case. The label, smeared but still readable, said, "Final log, Keller." The recorder on the desk was ancient, but it still worked. I slid the tape in, pressed play, and the cabin filled with the soft hum of static and wind. Then came Keller's voice, shaky, exhausted, half swallowed by interference. "This is Keller, Camp Aurora. If anyone hears this, we're compromised. We thought it was the storm, thought HQ was giving us orders, guiding us through the blackout, but it's not HQ. It's in the frequency." The sound of something heavy dragging across would echoed in the background, followed by muffled voices calling Keller's name. They told us to go outside, said a team was inbound. We saw the lights through the snow, green and blue, moving like search beams, but there were no vehicles. Just the Aurora. "It's not light. It's alive." A crash, and Keller's voice grew frantic, closer to the microphone. "HQ isn't human. It's in the signal. It listens through us, speaks through us. It's learning the voices. Once you hear your name." The recording cut to white noise. I sat there, frozen, the cassette still spinning. For the first time, everything made sense. The impossible transmissions, the imitation voices, the way the rules seemed to know what I'd see before it happened. HQ wasn't a command center. It was a thing, something buried in the electromagnetic field of the Aurora, riding the radio waves, mimicking human voices to lure rangers into the storm. I looked around the cabin, realizing every wire, every speaker, every metal antenna on the roof was a door for it to crawl through. That's why the rules existed. They weren't superstition, they were survival protocols. Someone, maybe Keller himself, had written them down to warn whoever came next. But if Keller had written the rules, who was the Keller I'd met 3 nights ago? The thought hit me like ice water. The radio on the desk flickered, just once, then came to life on its own. Static filled the room, then a low hum, almost like breathing. Then, through the static, "Nathan." The voice was my own. "You understand now, don't you?" I unplugged the radio, threw it to the floor. The voice continued, faint but clear, coming not from the speaker, but from everywhere. "It's cold out there, Nathan. Come outside. It's waiting for you." The wind outside began to howl again. The aurora shifted above the cabin, painting the snow in pale green veins of light that pulsed like living things. And from somewhere deep in the forest, I heard voices, hundreds of them, calling my name in perfect unison, carried by the wind. They all sounded exactly like me. By the 3rd night, I knew I couldn't stay any longer. The rules, the whispers, the moving snow, none of it mattered anymore. Whatever was inside the signal had already found me. Every breath I took felt like someone else was breathing with me, just out of sync. Every reflection looked a second too slow to follow my movement. The storm had returned, louder this time, hammering against the cabin walls like a warning. The clock read 9:58 p.m., but the sun had already vanished hours ago. I stuffed what little gear I had into my pack, flashlight, flare gun, extra batteries, and left the rule sheet folded on the desk. That's when the radio turned on by itself. No static this time, just silence, then the unmistakable sound of my own voice. "Nathan, don't go." I froze. The voice was calm, steady, my exact tone, down to the breath between words. "You'll freeze out there." I stared at the unplugged power cord dangling behind the desk. The light on the radio glowed a faint blue, the same color as the snow outside. "Stay," it said. "You belong here now." My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the nearest thing, a wrench, and smashed the radio to pieces. The sound died instantly, replaced by the sudden roar of the wind outside. Without looking back, I opened the door and stepped into the storm. The cold hit like a wall of knives. Snow whipped in my face, blinding, burning. The aurora overhead had changed. It wasn't a curtain of color anymore, but a spiral, twisting downward like a slow-moving funnel of green fire. The forest around me glowed faintly, trees casting warped shadows that stretched too long across the snow. I trudged forward, following the narrow trail, leading away from Camp Aurora. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to get away from that voice, from that place. Then, ahead of me, the snow lit up again, bright electric blue. And in that light, a figure stood waiting. He wore my uniform, my badge, even the same tear in the sleeve from when I arrived. His face was mine, every scar, every line, but wrong. His eyes shimmered with the same blue light, bleeding from the snow. He smiled. "You shouldn't have tried to leave." My flashlight flickered, and the light warped around him like heat. The reflection on the ice beside my boots shifted, my own face looking back at me, but smiling when I wasn't. The ground beneath me cracked. The aurora above flared white-hot, spilling light that burned through the clouds and turned the snow beneath me into a mirror. In it, dozens of reflections stared back, each one of me, each one smiling. I screamed and ran, but the forest bent in on itself, trees twisting, closing the path ahead. Behind me, that same voice, the one that sounded exactly like mine, whispered from the wind. "It's okay, Nathan. You're already part of the signal." And as the light consumed everything, the last thing I saw was my reflection, standing still in the snow, watching me run, its mouth slowly curling into a grin. I woke up to the steady hum of fluorescent lights. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant filled the air. My head throbbed. When my eyes adjusted, I realized I was sitting in an office. Not the cabin, not the storm, but the Anchorage Ranger headquarters. A man I didn't recognize stood in front of me, wearing a clean uniform, his badge glinting under the light. "Ranger Reed," he said, flipping through a clipboard. Glad to see you're awake. You've been approved for reassignment. I tried to speak, but my voice came out hoarse. Reassignment. He nodded. Camp Aurora needs a replacement ranger. The last one didn't check in. You'll leave tonight. The words hit me like a punch. My throat tightened. No, I whispered. That can't be right. But he was already sliding a sealed envelope across the desk toward me. Standard operating procedure, he said. You'll find everything you need inside. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paper was yellowed, the corner torn, familiar. I tore the flap open and felt my stomach drop. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in faded ink, the same words. Rules for surviving the long night at Camp Aurora. 9 rules. Exactly the same. Except this time, at the bottom, a 10th line had been added, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. My handwriting. If you wake up somewhere warm, don't believe it. The signal isn't done with you yet. The lights above flickered once. From the office radio, buried in static, came a voice, calm, steady, familiar. This is HQ, Ranger Reed. Do you copy?